The human colony on the edge of the galaxy had always lived in peace, surrounded by the quiet beauty of distant stars. The people went about their daily lives, working, learning, and growing. They had always believed that they were alone in this vast universe. They had no reason to suspect that their peaceful existence would soon come to an end. One day, the colony received an unexpected signal. At first, it was dismissed as a harmless transmission, perhaps from a neighboring colony or a passing ship. But when the message was analyzed, it was clear that this was no ordinary signal. The content was a mix of unknown symbols and strange patterns. The scientists were baffled. They couldn't make sense of it. It was unlike anything they had encountered before. They tried to decode it, but it was as though the message was from another world, a place they couldn't even imagine. As the hours passed, the situation grew more urgent. The signal wasn't just a random occurrence, it was a call. A call to someone, or something, that had been waiting for this moment. The message seemed to carry an important meaning, though they couldn't understand it. Panic began to creep in. The leaders of the colony, including General Malik, a calm and calculated man, gathered in a meeting room to discuss their options. "We have to find out who sent this," General Malik said, his voice steady but filled with concern. "We can't ignore it." The colony's best translators and scientists worked tirelessly, trying to crack the code. But the more they tried, the more they realized that the message wasn't meant for them. It was a warning of something coming, something that could change everything. By the time they understood what the signal meant, it was too late. The first signs of danger arrived without warning. Out of nowhere, strange objects appeared in the sky. They weren't like any ships the humans had ever seen. They were enormous, shimmering with an eerie glow. The people of the colony were confused, unsure of what they were seeing. They had no frame of reference for this kind of threat. General Malik stared at the sky, his heart pounding. He had spent his entire life preparing for war, but nothing in his experience had ever prepared him for this. The ships didn't make any noise. They didn't fire anything. They simply hovered in the air, like silent giants watching from above. "What are they waiting for?" one of the officers asked, voice trembling. "Why don't they attack?" Malik didn't have an answer. He felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on him, and for the first time, he felt completely powerless. The ships hovered for days, their presence a constant reminder that something massive was happening. The colony's defenses were ready, but no one knew what they were defending against. The people started to panic. Fear spread through the streets. There was a sense of impending doom that couldn't be shaken. But still, nothing happened. The ships just lingered, as though studying the colony. Then, one morning, everything changed. The sky was clear, the sun shining brightly. But that peaceful day was shattered by the sound of alarms blaring across the colony. The ground trembled as if something enormous was approaching. The people rushed to their shelters, unsure of what was coming. General Malik, who had spent years preparing for countless scenarios, knew one thing for certain. This was no ordinary threat. He ordered the evacuation of all civilians to the underground bunkers. "Move quickly. We have to get everyone to safety," he shouted. His mind raced as he tried to understand the situation. The enemy had not attacked yet, but the very fact that they had come so close was enough to put everyone on edge. "General," one of his officers said, breathing heavily as he approached, "we've intercepted a transmission. It's from the alien ships." Malik's heart skipped a beat. "What does it say?" The officer looked at the screen in front of him, his face pale. "It's a warning. A message that doesn't make sense to us. But it says we've made a grave mistake." A chill ran down Malik's spine as the full weight of the message hit him. "A mistake? What mistake?" The officer swallowed hard. "It says we've provoked them. That our signal was a declaration of war." The room fell silent. General Malik's mind raced as he tried to process the information. "War," he whispered to himself. "We didn't mean to provoke anyone. We didn't know who they were, or what they were capable of. The officer continued, "It also says that they will be coming for us, that there will be no stopping them." General Malik clenched his fists. He had faced many battles in his life, but this was different. He had never faced an enemy like this, and worse, they had no idea how to fight back. This was a war they had never asked for, but now it seemed unavoidable. The first wave of attacks came soon after. The ships in the sky began to move, faster than anyone could imagine. The colony's defense systems were activated, but the alien ships didn't respond in the way they expected. They didn't come down firing. Instead, they circled above, releasing what looked like small drones that darted through the air like deadly insects. The people of the colony could only watch in horror as the drones descended upon them, locking onto their targets with precision. General Malik knew they had to act quickly, but time was running out. The war they never wanted had already begun, and they were helpless to stop it. The battle for survival had started, and no one knew if they would be able to stop the most dangerous species in the galaxy from destroying everything they held dear. The human colony on the edge of the galaxy had always considered itself a peaceful outpost. Life was simple, and the stars stretched endlessly above, offering a sense of safety and tranquility. People went about their daily routines, unaware that the universe around them might not be as peaceful as they believed. They were about to learn that something far beyond their comprehension had noticed them, and it wasn't friendly. The signal, initially perceived as a strange anomaly, had sent waves of confusion through the colony. It wasn't just a random transmission. It was an invitation, or perhaps a warning. The people of the colony were unprepared for what came next. The first hint of danger arrived one evening, just as the sky turned to shades of orange and pink. Without any warning, the sky above began to shimmer. The first sign of something unfamiliar was the flicker of light, a soft, haunting glow that slowly expanded. Then they appeared. Large, unfamiliar ships, their forms sleek and strange, hovering silently above the colony. No sound, no movement, just a presence that was unsettling. At first, the people didn't know what to make of it. Some thought it was some sort of advanced technology from a neighboring colony. Others suspected it was a strange phenomenon they couldn't yet explain. But the longer the ships lingered in the sky, the more it became clear that this wasn't something they could easily dismiss. People gathered in the streets, eyes turned upward, their faces painted with curiosity and fear. The ships, still silent, seemed to be studying them, observing every move without making any indication of intent. General Malik, the colony's leader, was immediately called to the command center. As he arrived, the atmosphere was thick with tension. His mind raced. He had prepared for many scenarios, but nothing had prepared him for this. His heart pounded as he tried to make sense of what was happening. His advisors spoke in hushed tones, unsure of what to say. One thing was clear. This wasn't a friendly visit. "Do we have any idea what these ships are?" Malik asked, his voice calm, though his mind was far from it. He knew this could be a turning point for the colony, a point they would never come back from. "We're still trying to decipher their origin, sir," one of the officers replied. "But based on their movement and appearance, these aren't anything we've ever encountered. We might be dealing with a completely different species." Malik frowned. "Any response from them?" "No, sir. They'd been hovering for hours without any communication. But the patterns in the way they move, it's almost as if they're waiting for something. Or someone." Malik's thoughts flashed back to the message they had received days earlier. The strange, unreadable symbols that had puzzled their best scientists. It all started to make sense now. This was no coincidence. The species responsible for the ships was out there, and they had made their presence known. But the question remained, why? The days that followed were filled with anticipation and confusion. The ships didn't leave. They didn't make a single move except to silently drift through the atmosphere. The colony's defenses were on high alert, but they couldn't defend against something they didn't understand. The military, though advanced, was ill-equipped to deal with an unknown force that seemed to be toying with them. They could only watch and wait. One evening, the silence was broken, not by a sound, but by a strange energy pulse that emanated from the ships. It wasn't an attack, but it was enough to shake the very ground beneath them. The pulse seemed to radiate throughout the colony, causing lights to flicker and machinery to hum erratically. The energy seemed to affect everything in its path. The pulse was unlike anything humanity had ever experienced. It was both alien and unnerving. General Malik stood at the command center, staring at the screen in front of him. A message was coming through, but it wasn't in any language they could understand. This time, the symbols were clearer, more defined. There was a pattern, but the meaning remained elusive. As the transmission played out, Malik felt a sense of unease growing in the pit of his stomach. "We've decoded part of the message," one of the translators said, his voice tense. "It says, 'You have awakened us. You have called us.'" Malik's heart skipped a beat. "Awakened us? Called us?" He repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. The implications were terrifying. The translator continued, his eyes wide with fear. "The rest is difficult to translate, but it seems like a warning that we've done something they consider a grave mistake." Malik stared at the screen, feeling the weight of the words pressing down on him. A mistake. What mistake? The officer hesitated before speaking. "It's unclear, sir, but it seems like our signal, our attempt to communicate, was interpreted as a declaration. They believe we've provoked them." A silence fell over the room. The realization hit like a wave. They had unknowingly triggered something far more powerful than they had ever imagined. A species capable of traversing the galaxy, with technology and strength beyond anything the humans could comprehend, had been awakened, and now they were coming for them. The following hours were filled with frantic preparations. The people were told to stay calm and follow the emergency protocols. But the fear was palpable. General Malik had seen many battles in his career, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of facing an entire species, one that seemed to exist beyond the realms of their understanding. They had no idea how to defend against what was coming, and no way to know when it would arrive. The ships in the sky had not moved, but they were watching, observing, and whatever their next move would be, Malik knew one thing for certain. Humanity was no longer in control of its fate. The war had already begun, and it was a war they had never intended to start. The days passed with an eerie sense of dread hanging over the colony. Though the alien ships had not yet moved, their presence was undeniable. People walked through the streets with uneasy glances upward, unsure of what to expect next. The once bustling markets now seemed quieter, and there was an air of tension that couldn't be shaken. The colony, which had once thrived in peace, now lived in the shadow of an unknown enemy. General Malik paced through the command center, his mind racing. He had been trained for many types of conflict, but nothing had prepared him for this. The silence of the ships overhead was unnerving, but it was their stillness that made them even more dangerous. There was no telling when they would act, or what their intentions were. His every instinct told him to prepare for the worst, but what could he prepare for when he had no idea what kind of war they were entering? At the same time, the scientists worked day and night to understand the message they had decoded. The transmission had been puzzling, but there was something about the phrase, "You have awakened us," that sent chills down the spines of everyone who heard it. It was as if the alien species had been lying dormant, waiting for the exact moment when humanity's curiosity would provoke them. And now, that moment had arrived. Meanwhile, life on the colony had slowed to a crawl. People were too afraid to leave their homes for long. The markets, which once bustled with the sounds of laughter and conversation, were now filled with whispers of fear. Parents kept their children close, and many families made sure they stayed inside after sunset, when the sky above was filled with those silent, watchful ships. General Malik knew it wasn't enough to rely on fear and hope. They had to act. They had to figure out what this species wanted, and how to stop them, if it was even possible. A meeting was called in the colony's war room. General Malik stood at the head of the table, his face grim. Around him sat his most trusted officers, the brightest minds in the colony, but even their expertise couldn't provide the answers they needed. "We need to understand what's coming for us," Malik said, his voice steady, but his mind full of uncertainty. "We can't wait for them to make the first move." One of the officers spoke up. "We've tried everything, General. We've sent signals, tried to establish communication, but we haven't received any response. Not a word. Nothing." Malik nodded slowly, the frustration evident in his eyes. "We need to think differently. What if they're not attacking us right away because they don't need to? What if they're studying us?" The idea hung in the air. The ships had been hovering for days, never making a move, never showing any signs of aggression. It was as if they were waiting, watching, observing the people below. And the more Malik thought about it, the more it seemed like the ships weren't in a hurry. They were deliberate, patient, as if the species behind the ships already knew the outcome and had no need to rush. What if they already have what they want? Malik muttered under his breath, almost to himself. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Could it be true? Was there something about the colony that had drawn this species' attention? They had no answers, only questions. Back at the colony's outer edges, the first signs of movement came in the form of small vessels. They didn't come from the alien ships themselves, but from smaller crafts that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. These crafts moved swiftly and silently, touching down on the outskirts of the colony. Their purpose was unclear, but there was no doubt in the minds of the citizens that these small ships were part of a much bigger plan. And that plan, whatever it was, had begun. In the streets, whispers spread like wildfire. People who had seen the ships from afar were starting to notice something strange. The landscape around them, the trees, the rocks, the buildings were being altered in subtle ways. It wasn't immediate, but there was something different about the land. The buildings seemed to shift ever so slightly, as if something unseen was changing the very fabric of their reality. The atmosphere grew thick, heavy, as though something was pressing down on the colony. No one could explain it, but everyone could feel it. General Malik couldn't ignore the strange occurrences either. He received reports from all corners of the colony about strange atmospheric shifts, as well as reports of lights flickering and machinery malfunctioning in ways that were impossible to explain. Something wasn't right, and he needed to know what was causing it. He ordered a group of engineers and scientists to investigate, to uncover what was behind the odd disturbances. As the team delved deeper into their investigation, they discovered something terrifying. The energy pulses from the ships weren't random at all. They were systematically altering the environment, manipulating the atmosphere in ways that were unimaginable. The strange patterns weren't merely electrical interference. They were disrupting the very balance of nature itself. It wasn't just a warning. It was a test. "What does this mean?" one of the engineers asked as they pored over the data. "Are they preparing for something?" Malik felt a knot tighten in his stomach as the implications became clear. The species wasn't just waiting. They were altering their surroundings, testing the limits of their technology. And whatever they were preparing for, it was something far beyond anything the colony had ever experienced. The pieces began to fall into place. The ships hadn't just come to observe. They had come to claim. Whatever they had been waiting for, whether it was an invasion, an experiment, or something even more incomprehensible, they were now making their move. Slowly, carefully, methodically, and with every passing moment, it seemed like the colony was slipping further and further from safety. General Malik stood by the window, staring at the alien ships above. He had always believed that humanity was in control of its destiny, but now, for the first time in his life, he felt powerless. What had started as a peaceful existence had turned into a nightmare, and the war, which had seemed like something distant and abstract, was now knocking at their door. There was no turning back. As the days turned into weeks, the tension in the colony only grew. The air seemed thicker, heavier, as if it carried a weight that no one could shake. People continued to go about their daily lives, but the uneasy glance toward the sky, the constant feeling of being watched, never left them. The ships had not moved, and yet everything around them was changing. It was as if the very fabric of their existence was slowly, subtly being rewritten. General Malik knew that time was running out. The more they waited, the more the atmosphere around the colony seemed to shift, as though something immense was slowly building up, just out of sight. There was no question that the alien species above them had a plan, and whatever that plan was, it was becoming clearer by the day. What they had once considered an isolated, peaceful outpost on the fringes of the galaxy now seemed to be at the center of something far bigger, something humanity was unprepared for. Malik paced through the command center, his mind spinning with possibilities. It was clear that the alien species had been watching them for much longer than anyone had realized. They had monitored their progress, their habits, and their attempts at communication. And now, it seemed that the moment for a response had finally come. "We need to make contact," Malik said firmly, his voice breaking through the hushed murmurs of his officers. "We need to speak with them directly. No more waiting." The team of scientists and linguists had been working tirelessly, trying to decipher the messages they had received. The first transmission was just a series of strange symbols, but it seemed clear now that they were part of something larger, a language, a code, that needed to be unraveled. And yet, despite their best efforts, the meaning of the transmission remained elusive. Some of the symbols resembled known languages, but others were entirely foreign. It was as though the aliens were using a blend of languages, or even creating a new one, designed to keep humanity from fully understanding their intentions. "We've been trying to reach them for weeks now," one of the linguists said, frustration creeping into his voice. "But each time we send a message, it feels like they're pulling further away. They don't want us to understand. Or maybe they don't need us to." Malik nodded, his expression grave. He had thought that opening communication would give them some control, some understanding of the situation. But it seemed that the aliens were not as eager to share their knowledge. They were sending messages, but they were cryptic, offering just enough information to keep the colony guessing, to keep them on edge. "Then we need a different approach," Malik said. "If they're not going to make contact on their terms, then we'll do it on ours." The decision was made to send a team of diplomats, scientists, and engineers to the outskirts of the colony, where the alien ships were hovering. It was a dangerous move, but General Malik felt it was the only option left. The alien presence above them was not something they could ignore any longer, and he couldn't risk waiting for them to make the first move. If they wanted to learn more about this species, they had to take the initiative. The team prepared for the journey, though no one truly knew what to expect. The closer they got to the ships, the more the strange energy pulses seemed to intensify. It wasn't a physical force, but rather something that tugged at the very core of their beings, making every step feel like they were walking through a fog of uncertainty. The landscape around the colony had changed. Where once there were lush green fields and open skies, now there was an unnerving stillness. The air felt thinner, as though it were being drained of its natural properties, leaving behind something that felt alien, unnatural. Trees that had once stood tall and proud now appeared to bend unnaturally, their branches twisting in ways that defied the laws of nature. It was as though the entire environment had been altered, reshaped by the mysterious presence overhead. As the team reached the outer limits of the colony, they saw the ships up close for the first time. They had always seemed so distant, so far away, but now they towered above them, looming in the sky like massive sentinels. The vessels weren't like anything the humans had ever seen. Their surface shimmered, constantly shifting as though they were alive, constantly moving. There were no visible signs of weapons, no outward signs of danger. And yet the presence of these ships filled the air with an overwhelming sense of unease. "We're not sure if we're welcome," one of the scientists said quietly, his voice tinged with fear. "We're not sure if we should be here at all." General Malik looked around, his eyes scanning the ships. The closer they got, the more he felt like he was standing on the edge of something vast and unknown. The ships' designs were beautiful, yet haunting. The materials seemed to hum with energy, almost as if they were powered by something beyond human understanding. There was no way to predict what might happen next. Would the aliens welcome them? Or was this just another step in a much larger plan? As the team reached the designated meeting point, a strange energy filled the air. It wasn't painful, but it was all-encompassing, as though it reached deep into their bones and rattled their very souls. And then the silence was broken, not by any sound, but by the ships above. They began to move, slowly, deliberately. One by one, the ships shifted in the sky, their forms aligning in a way that seemed almost intentional, almost as if they were making room for something bigger. General Malik felt his heart race as he watched the ships move. He had no idea what was coming next, but it was clear that the situation was rapidly escalating. The first steps had been taken. The species they had unknowingly provoked had begun to make their intentions known, and now there was no turning back. Whatever path they were walking down, it was one that led into the unknown, a path that would test everything humanity had ever known. And as the ships above began to take shape, Malik realized that the war they had feared was no longer a distant possibility. It was already here. The change came without warning. One morning, as the colony's people awoke to another day of uncertainty, the sky above had transformed. The alien ships no longer hovered silently. They now moved in slow, synchronized patterns, casting long shadows across the ground. It wasn't a threat, but it wasn't peace either. It was something in between, something no one could quite explain. Inside the command center, General Malik studied the new movement. His eyes tracked the slow rotations of the ships, the way they repositioned themselves as if responding to some invisible signal. He couldn't tell if it was a message or a preparation. Still, it was different from anything they'd seen before. "Do you feel it?" asked Dr. Illyra, the lead scientist. "It's not just them moving. The air, the energy around us, it's reacting." Malik nodded slowly. The data was showing strange patterns. Readings from their instruments began fluctuating, not wildly, but enough to show that something beneath the surface had changed. The planet's magnetic field showed minor shifts. Communication systems became unpredictable, with small delays and static creeping in. But most of all, people were changing. Reports from around the colony told of strange dreams, shared by many. People spoke of lights in the sky, symbols that glowed and feelings that weren't their own. No one knew what it meant, but it was happening to too many to be coincidence. Even Malik, strong-willed and sharp-minded, found himself waking in the middle of the night, heart racing from images he couldn't explain. Visions of stars folding in on themselves, and a soundless voice echoing through the emptiness. The decision was made to send a second team outside the colony, this time not just to observe, but to interact. They carried a new device, something the engineers called a resonance core. It was built to respond to the same energy the alien ships seemed to use, a kind of nonverbal communication, based on frequency and harmony. They didn't know if it would work, but it was the only tool left to try. The team placed the device on a hilltop where the ships were closest. As they activated it, a soft pulse spread through the air. It was not loud, not even a sound. It was more like a feeling, a gentle pressure behind the eyes, a presence just out of reach. The pulse continued, steady and calm, like a heartbeat. Then the sky shimmered. A line of light traced itself across the clouds. It was not natural, nor was it threatening. It was elegant, like a drawing being made in the air. The line became a pattern, and the pattern became a shape, something geometric, something precise. It floated for several seconds, then faded away as if the sky had exhaled. Elira's voice was barely above a whisper. "It's working. They've seen us." For the next few days, the skies continued to show signs of movement. The shapes would return, each one different. Sometimes they appeared as perfect circles, other times as stars with many points. No one could understand the full meaning, but they felt like steps toward something. And then came the first true message. Inside the resonance core, a new pattern emerged. It wasn't just light. It was sound and movement, like a melody made of shifting colors. It moved in a rhythm that made hearts beat faster, but not from fear. It was as if the colony was being introduced to something ancient, something that had lived for eons beyond the edge of known space. The message wasn't in words. It was in feeling, in awareness, and it carried only one meaning. We see you. General Malik stood in silence. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a warning. It was a presence. The species above them had finally responded, not through control, not through power, but through understanding. And still, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being studied, not out of curiosity, but out of caution. That night, Malik met with the colony council. "They're not attacking," he said, "but they are watching. Everything we do matters now. Every signal we send, every word we say, it's all being measured." The council members nodded, the weight of the situation settling deeper into their bones. They had once believed this colony was a place of peace, a symbol of hope for humanity in the stars. Now, it felt like a mirror, reflecting not just who they were, but what they might become. And still, the dreams came. More people spoke of lights in their sleep, of voices without sound, of standing in the middle of endless stars, where time felt slower and everything felt alive. One child, only 10 years old, drew a picture of the ship's pattern before anyone had shown it to her. When asked how she knew, she simply said, "They showed me." The aliens were not speaking in language. They were speaking through connection, through shared space and shared thought. General Malik stared at the stars long into the night, the sky pulsing gently with unseen rhythms. The fear had not left him, but it was now joined by something else, wonder, and a single unanswered question remained. Why now? Why this colony? Why them? Whatever the answer, it was coming, and humanity was no longer standing alone in the dark. The next few days passed in quiet tension. The skies remained calm, but the sense of being observed grew stronger. People moved carefully, spoke softly, as if the colony had become part of something greater, something that watched and listened to every step they took. The air was filled with a strange stillness, not uncomfortable, but unfamiliar. The colony had stopped acting like a group of settlers. They were now guests in a place they didn't fully understand. Dr. Illyra spent most of her time with the resonance core. She studied every shift in color, every change in pattern, recording it with care. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the core began to glow on its own. Soft pulses of light rose into the air, dancing in slow spirals. Then, without warning, the light stopped. In its place, a new sound began, soft, deep, and rhythmic, like the calm beat of a distant drum. But there were no drums. It was something else. The signal. The colony's communication screen lit up with unreadable symbols. They weren't letters. They weren't numbers. But something about them felt familiar, as if the shapes were made not to be read but to be felt. People gathered, unsure of what they were witnessing. Children were the first to react. They moved closer to the screen, pointing at the patterns with wide eyes. One of them whispered, "It feels like a song." That night, the elders of the colony came together with the scientists. They discussed the possibility that the alien presence was not just showing them patterns, but trying to share thoughts. Not through voice, but through feelings. Deep, clear emotions that could be understood by the mind if not the ear. General Malik walked through the colony under the stars. He passed people sitting quietly outside their homes, looking up. Some were drawing shapes in the dirt. Others were writing in notebooks. Everyone was trying to make sense of the invisible thread that now connected them to the beings above. At dawn, a new message came, this time not from the core, but from the sky. A large ship, different from the rest, descended slowly. It didn't land. It hovered above a wide field just outside the colony's boundary. It had no visible doors, no lights, no movement. It simply waited. Malik and Illyra stood at the edge of the field, looking up. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, the ground beneath the ship shimmered, and a path of light formed between the colony and the vessel. Not a solid bridge, not a beam, but a trail of soft glowing dust, as if inviting them to walk forward. No one dared move at first. But then a small girl, the same one who had drawn the symbols before, stepped forward. She smiled and began walking toward the light. Her parents hesitated, but something in her calm face told them to trust her. Malik quickly stepped beside her. "You won't go alone," he said gently. Together, they followed the glowing path until they stood directly beneath the hovering ship. The girl reached out her hand, and the light responded, swirling gently around her fingers like it had been waiting. The ship began to hum, a quiet, peaceful sound, like a lullaby whispered by the stars. Then the message came again, but this time it was not for the machines or the resonance core. It was felt by everyone at once, a gentle warmth in their minds, a thought that wasn't their own but also didn't feel strange. "We are listening." Those 3 words, without voice, without force, passed through every person in the colony. Some wept quietly. Others stood still, their hands over their hearts. For the first time, they felt truly seen. Illyra stood next to Malik, her voice steady. "They are not here to take. They are here to understand. And maybe they're waiting for us to understand too." The girl looked up at the ship with a quiet smile, as if she already knew all of this. She turned to the others and simply said, "They want to learn." From that moment, the colony changed, not through big events or sudden discovery, but through small moments, shared feelings, silent thoughts, peaceful understanding. The aliens didn't speak. They didn't appear, but they remained present, always just above, always watching kindly, as if guarding a secret they hoped humanity would discover on its own. And in the silence of the stars, the message remained clear. Not every arrival brings fear. Sometimes it brings the chance to listen. The stars above shimmered with a quiet brilliance, casting soft light over the colony as it slowly awoke to a new kind of life. Days passed gently. The sky no longer felt like a boundary, but a window. The alien ship still hovered above the field, silent and unmoving, yet its presence was no longer strange. It felt natural, like a mountain or a cloud. Something that had always been there, just not noticed before. Inside the research dome, Dr. Illyra sat surrounded by drawings made by the colony's children. They had all started to dream the same dream. A sky filled with shapes, voices made of light, and thoughts that had no words. Some of the images were abstract, others more clear, but all of them carried the same feeling: peace, curiosity, and something that felt very close to hope. The resonance core now pulsed gently, in rhythm with the hum of the ship above. It no longer flickered or flashed. It had settled into a soft, steady glow. Illyra placed her hand near it and closed her eyes. She didn't see images or hear voices, but she felt something. A quiet presence, like someone watching with kindness, waiting patiently. General Malik walked the edge of the colony, as he always did. He no longer expected danger. His steps were slower now, more thoughtful. The colony had grown quieter, not from fear, but from reflection. People were no longer asking what would happen next. They were asking what they could do now, how they could be more than they were before. A new structure began to form at the edge of the glowing path. It wasn't built by human hands. It rose slowly from the ground, its surface smooth and changing with the light, like a ripple in still water. It didn't look like a building or a machine. It looked like a story, something meant to be understood over time. The colony gathered around it each day, watching it shift and grow. It never made noise. It never moved quickly. But the longer people watched it, the more they began to see patterns, familiar shapes, familiar colors. It reflected their own memories, their own choices. Somehow, it knew them. One night, Malik stood before the structure and spoke aloud, though no one had asked him to. "We came here looking for a new place. We thought we were alone. We thought we were ready. But we were still learning, still becoming." The structure pulsed softly, and from within it came a light. Not bright, not blinding, just clear. Inside the light, images appeared, not of aliens or ships, but of people. The colony. Their faces, their stories, their mistakes, their kindness, their moments of silence and understanding. It was like being seen in a mirror, but more true. The next morning, the light path to the ship faded slowly, like morning mist. The ship itself began to rise. It didn't rush. It simply lifted, silently, gracefully, like a leaf carried by the wind. As it moved higher, the structure beside the colony stopped changing. It became still, like a finished painting. People didn't cry. They didn't shout. They simply stood together, hands resting on each other's shoulders, watching the ship disappear into the sky. Later that evening, Alira wrote in her journal, "We met something greater than us, not in power or size, but in understanding. And they didn't take from us. They gave us something invisible, a message without words. They reminded us that being strong doesn't always mean being loud. That being seen is more than just being noticed. We were not the first they visited, and we may not be the last. But we listened. We changed. And maybe that was the point." As the stars returned to their places above, the colony continued. Quiet, thoughtful, connected. They had not won or lost anything. They had only grown. And somewhere, in the silence of space, the watchers continued their journey, perhaps carrying with them a new story. The story of a small human colony that learned how to listen.